for whatever he's got in store for us.
Yeah, for whatever delights are about to come your way. Yeah, so I want to talk today about beginner's mind. It's something we've talked about before, but I think it's a really useful concept. And again, I keep coming across this stuff in our own clients, and I'm reminded of the need to kind of talk about this a little bit. So I have a couple examples to start out my little discussion here. So a client that might attend some kind of S meeting, SCA, SLAA, SA, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But he looks around the circle of men and he says, well, gee, I never did that. I never did what that guy did, or I have nothing to do with that guy. I don't identify with anybody in here. Just coming in with all kinds of preconceptions about what the meeting is and how he doesn't relate by comparing it. Or there may be somebody who needs 12-step program desperately, but has heard that 12-step stuff is all about the God thing, and he's doesn't want to have anything to do with 12-step meetings because he doesn't want to be dictated to about his idea of God and the spirituality and join that cult. Or a third one might be, I'm acting out all over the place, but instead of really taking responsibility for my behavior, I want to blame it on my ADHD or my spouse gaining weight or anything else outside me. And each of these are very different examples, but they're all related to our preconceptions of things and responsibility about what we're doing and what we see and how we do it. And that's where the concept of beginner's mind comes in, because I think beginner's mind basically is, I guess, Zen Buddhism, but what it basically means is that I begin a new task or a new experience or a new adventure or anything new, but I try to begin it with as few preconceptions as possible. So I go in with an open mind. That's the beginner's mind. I am not judging it. I don't have biases about it. I don't have opinions that are already hardened before I ever try it out. And all these are barriers to allow me to really engage, unless I can just come in and accept what I see and accept what's going on. So I think that beginner's mind concept is really important. And it's especially important because one of the essential tasks, I guess, in recovery in the beginning is acceptance. And we have to accept the fact that we have this problem, we have this disease, we have issues, and we have to accept the fact that we've kind of created it in our own life. And so I think to really understand that requires that we're open to possibilities, because the old ways really didn't do it for us. We had to be open to a new idea. And most addicts, in my experience, myself included, don't really make that change unless the pain of staying in that old spot is so great that we have the momentum to finally move out of it. So that's why this recovery is a learning process. It's so important to have this beginner's mind, because we'd be open to the concepts. Some of them are going to be really challenging. Some of them are going to be frightening. A lot of it, surrender and relinquishing control is very frightening in and of itself. And so as we get into early recovery, we have to learn these new ways of thinking. We have to learn how to take responsibility. We have to understand our issues. We have to accept our role and basically embrace a whole new way of life. And I think we can really make that complicated and hard. And it's natural, I think, to put up a little bit of a fight. But I think the fewer judgments, the fewer preconceptions, whether it's about the other people in the room, about the program itself, about our need for it, anything at all, the less we can impose on that our preconceived notions, the better off we'll be in terms of moving forward. So, what happens to us anyway with addicts? Why do we lose this sense of beginner's mind and this kind of openness about it? One of the things I think is that addicts, become experts. Our partners become experts, right? And one of the ways, the classic way I think we deal with this problem with any addiction, whether it's drugs or sex or both, is to really try to get information about it. So many clients come in and say, if I just knew why do I do this, then I wouldn't do it. And that kind of makes sense logically, but there's a fallacy there, because I've seen thousands of clients who had all kinds of information and who knew far more about addiction than I ever did. They've read every book. They've probably gone to treatment several times. They've read seminars, but they can't get sober. And so we know that information alone is not the key. And so that's one thing where I think we have a bias that we kind of confuse ourselves. The same thing, by the way, with partners. Abused partners will will become detectives and sleuths trying to figure out where the addict is or what they're doing. They'll put tracers on, they'll look at the chat history, they'll do all kinds of complicated things to figure out what's going on. The fallacy there is that all the information in the world isn't enough to make them feel safe, because really the strategy is they're trying to find a solution for the anxiety they're experiencing. And the belief is that if I just get enough information, I'll be reassured. The problem is there's never enough information to achieve that. And so all these things require, from both the addict point of view and the partner point of view, this idea of open-mindedness and kind of beginner's mind, that new way of thinking. Shame and stigma. This is another barrier, I think, why we can't see it really, why we sort of fall into this trap. There's a lot of shame involved with addiction, especially sex addiction. And there's a whole lot of stigma all around. So we have to, I think, be aware of that. We have this hardened fusion of our thoughts and our beliefs. We get dug into this belief system that keeps us trapped in our addictive behavior. We can't see a way out. We just keep doing the same thing over and over again, thinking maybe this time it'll be different. That old famous definition of craziness and insanity. And finally, there's different kinds of biases that psychologists have looked at. There's confirmation bias, there's negativity bias, but basically what happens, I think, in the life of an addict, in the mind of an addict, is that we start to really accumulate all the reasons why we can't change, or why it's not going to work for us, and why it'll never work for us, and we tried it before and it failed then, it's going to fail again. There's a negativity bias. It's the glass half full, kind of writ large in very, very dramatic ways. So all those things start to interfere. So if we really want to embrace beginner's mind, this idea that we can be open to an experience without necessarily having to judge it or have any preconceived notions, what do we have to do? I think one of the things, besides just having an open mind, is maybe more of a challenge than it is to say, is to really learn as we go. I think we don't need to know everything. We can take that concept of a day at a time, which is often repeated in 12-step program, and we can really use that concept to learn as we go. We don't have to know everything. I think knowledge is a way of combating fear when it comes to new experiences. And we have to just accept the fact that we may be a little uncomfortable and we may not know everything. We may have to sort of depend on other people. And all these things are kind of threatening. The other thing too, by the way, if there's something that comes along, there's this wonderful expression in 12-step program that says, take what works and leave the rest. We don't have to embrace every aspect. If I have some aspect of a meeting that really irks me and bothers me, well, maybe that's a feature of that meeting. I could try another meeting and see. But if it's a feature of all the meetings, maybe I just have to learn to accept that and just kind of just gloss over that in my mind and not focus on it and make that the central feature of my frustration of being at a meeting is this one piece of the format that I don't like, but to really embrace it and to sort of, and if we can't embrace it, leave it, take what works and leave the rest. And finally, ultimately, I think with beginner's mind and just awareness, it's really important to identify that what works today in terms of a strategy may not work tomorrow, right? Things change, we change as we go through program. And I think we have to be open to that as well. I think we often kind of seek the comfort of routine and sameness, and we kind of get locked into a pattern with our recovery program. And sometimes we need to grow, we need to move, and the same program, the same things we've been doing may not work as well. We may need to shake up our meetings or focus on something else, or add a trauma therapist to our clinical team, or whatever we need to do to realize the situation at hand. But so to sum this all up, I think at many avenues along the way, and especially in the beginning of our recovery, there's many we can with preconceptions and biases, we can really throw ourselves off the side of the cliff. So I think if we just embrace this beginner's mind concept, we take it what is, we accept we don't know everything, and we try to just accept what is without judgment, I think it'll carry us a long way. So thank you. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, David. This is a great topic. I like your basic definition. A beginner's mind is just approaching anything new with as few preconceptions as possible. Because as addicts, that is not our our MO most of the time. In AA, we often hear the phrase contempt prior to investigation. It's embedded in the big book. We hear it from old timers all the time, and yeah, I mean, when I came in, oh, this isn't going to work for me because, and this isn't going to work for me because, and I was too smart for my own good. And it took me a while to come down off my high horse and just start looking at things fresh and realizing those people over there are staying sober and I'm not. Maybe I need to, stop judging them and stop questioning everything they tell me and finding reasons not to do what they suggest, and just give in a little bit. But that was hard for my ego, and
Yeah.
I thought about it as kind of regressing to like a 4-year-old kid at some point, where everything was new and exciting and fresh, and everything that anybody said seemed like a good idea. So I just started, you tell a 4-year-old, Swiss cheese tastes good, and they're going to go and eat a bunch of Swiss cheese. They're just going to do it. That's a weird example out of nowhere. But so I just kind of had to say, okay, I'm just going to be a little kid, and I'm going to see everything with fresh eyes and take it as it's suggested and learn from experience rather than learn from my knowledge base, because my knowledge base was keeping me in my addiction. I had twisted it, and engaged so much denial with it. I was so good at lying to myself and twisting facts and blaming and shit, that I couldn't see through myself. So I had to just get myself out of the way. I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned that addicts become experts, and that can be a barrier. And I think you were talking about in recovery, we get all this information, we decide what's going to work and what's not going to work and why it's not going to, but I also think I immediately picture the addicts I know who were like, well, I drink this much alcohol to counter this much cocaine. And then at midnight, I have to switch to this. And then at 1 a.m., I like take these 3 pills so I can get to sleep. And then when I wake up at 6, I take this so I can perk up and get to work. And I have 4 cups of coffee. We become pharmacists.
Right. Right.
And can you talk a little bit about that and how that mindset transfers over and hurts our recovery as well?
Yeah, and I actually was thinking about sort of the addict in more their addiction as opposed to recovery, because as our lives start to spin out of control, as they inevitably do, we start to seek solutions to not only kind of ensure the high that we want, which is also sort of gets fleeting after a while. It's not always, things don't always turn out the way we want. And so we're always looking for that magic formula of what to do. And we push our moods up, and then we need something to pull them back down. And then we need something to perk ourselves up. And so it's just all over the place. And so I think, we become experts. I think the most dramatic example of those I've seen are with food addicts and especially anorexics who are worked eating disorders with young women who are anorexics, and they're totally food obsessed. Food is on their mind all the time. It's just it's a kind of with horror and avoidance. But they'll bake. They know more nutrition than a nutritionist, right? They're like dietitians. They know everything about it because they're totally obsessed with it. It's just their particular addictions to avoid it. But I think in many ways we do the same thing with, like you said, combining different drugs, activities, how to squeeze the most out of something, maybe take a supplement to push something else a little bit farther. And it gets really kind of overwhelming. And then when we sort of when it all collapses and we get into recovery, then I think we still are kind of the experts at it. And I think many times we'll see, for example, in treatment, people have been through treatment before. They want to kind of run their treatment. They know what they think they know what they need. And it's usually where we have significant blind spots, so that again, with all that knowledge, it's not very useful. And I think we have to kind of give it up and say, maybe we don't know as much as we thought we did, or maybe we don't really know anything about it. And we just have to kind of throw our hands up and say, okay, I trust you. What do I need to do? And that moment is hard to come.
We sometimes get pushbacks from guys, especially around things like testosterone, where it's like, well, I have a doctor's prescription. I'm like, okay, well, you have a doctor's prescription from 6 different doctors and you're taking it all. It's
right.
This pushback. I mean, addicts, we have this way of justifying things that we know aren't good for us. And sometimes that involves bringing a doctor
Very often, I think. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Or multiple doctors, as you said.
Yeah, multiple doctors and,
Yeah.
sleep pills and things like that. So just because it's a prescription doesn't mean we're not going to abuse it. Okay, let's get into the Q&A. It's still a pretty small group today, so ask us questions, just type them into the Q&A. We've got several to get us started here, and that's great. If I'm looking to start recovery work and I'm having difficulty finding a therapist, as they are all, this is the person who's having trouble finding a therapist because they're all booked. What recommendations do you have to start overall recovery work? An initial plan on overall items to ensure things you should do if you're having trouble finding a therapist. And this is a common refrain right now. Therapists are booked. COVID has sent people to therapy.
Yeah, it's every therapist I know is having a really busy time right now. There's a lot of need. So yeah, this is a hard situation because therapy is a really integral, in my mind, an integral part of recovery. Now, at the beginning, you don't necessarily have to have it. I got sober without a therapist for probably the first 6 months, and it was okay. But I just dropped into meetings, sometimes 2 and 3 meetings a day. So I think knowing that you probably need to do the deeper work with therapy is something. What I'd suggest you do is, if you have some therapists that you think might be a good fit for you, is to get on waiting lists. People do have waiting lists, and openings do happen. It may take a month or two, but I would see if that might be useful for you. And then, frankly, a month or two down the road might be good timing, because sometimes the therapy, if you get into it too soon, most people are a little bit fuzzy and kind of addled and disconnected and not totally present all the time, as you probably need to be to get the most benefit out of therapy. And so I think starting therapy a month or 2 or 3 down the road isn't necessarily a tragedy at all, because it gives you a chance to use that early time to really get grounded and programmed. And I think, by the way, if we're looking at overall items to ensure, what I would do is really connect with the group. The group is the key. That's the magic formula and the magic sauce of recovery, is that group connection, your social support system, the people you count on, the people you're getting sober with, the people you call, the people that call you. And those are all the connections that are highly protective of your recovery. So I'd do everything you can to establish a broad base of recovery. And then to look around, ask people, for therapist recommendations. I would get on a few waiting lists. And I have myself succumbed to a carefully worded pitch for help. So I think sometimes therapists, if you can actually talk to somebody, you might find there's a spot sooner than you might think. So I think just anything can happen. But I think the idea of just grounding yourself in meetings, you don't have to have a therapist. It's recommended down the road for sure. But I think in the beginning, it's okay if you don't. But just know that it's something you want to engage in. In the meantime, that gives you a chance to be on a waiting list and get some help. Now, if you have any kind of crisis going on, it doesn't sound like it from your question, but obviously any kind of crisis counseling is a different story. And that really needs to be addressed. And you may find there are social service agencies in your area that have quicker access to people that do this kind of crisis counseling, which is really short-term, kind of in the here and now. What can we do to get you stabilized? But that's a little different than what we're talking about, I think.
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of 12-step recovery. So is David. We're not shy about that. You've also found another option here with webinars. I encourage you to explore the drop-in discussion groups for addicts if you haven't done so already. Those are free. We have online work groups that are really low cost. We have one for sex addicts starting the beginning of next month. We have one for porn addicts starting in 10 days, and we have one for chemsex addicts starting
on the 20th of September. That I'm doing a 4-part chemsex interactive lecture series. It's really a small group discussion for 4 different weeks.
So we have one for chemsex if you have like fused or paired substance sex behaviors. We have one for porn addicts. So if porn is your thing, and then we also have one for sex addicts coming up. We do it every month. We have one for sex addicts. And they're 6 weeks. They meet once a week, and you get a grounding in recovery in the work groups in particular. you'll do some of the exercises you would do in early therapy, like, breaking through denial and creating a circle plan, which is a plan for sobriety, things like that. So there are definitely some options while you look for a CSAT. CSAT is a certified sex addiction therapist. So yeah, keep trying, get on the waiting list. David's right, and there's also inpatient if you're really struggling. So contact us with any questions. Just use the contact us button and say, hey, I'm looking for this, and we'll point you in the right direction.
And by the way, I know Tammy won't appreciate this probably because she's very busy, but Tammy knows like literally everybody in the country. And if you write to her, she might be able to make some recommendations for you, and that might carry some weight when you're approaching the therapist. So
yeah, Tammy knows every certified sex addiction therapist. Literally, she knows them all. Does having a beginner's mind mean losing all the knowledge and experience gained from the past? If no, then how do we manage to have a beginner's mind?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, it is actually.
Yeah, because the answer in my mind is no. We don't lose our identity. We don't lose our information. We don't kind of get stupid and become zombies. What it does do, it means I have to set aside my preconceived notions, right? And these are the stories we tell ourselves. Before I actually went to a 12-step meeting, I had no idea what they did. I'd heard a whole bunch of stuff, but I told myself all kinds of things about what happened there. And so really, and I did not have beginner's mind. I'll out myself. When I first went to program, I had all kinds of judgment. I was forced to go there because I was dying, frankly. And so I went into a lot of judgment. But what beginner's mind does is like, okay, we're not forgetting that. We're not throwing it overboard. We're just kind of pushing all that aside and just take the experience at face value. And just, okay, what is it? How do I feel when I'm here? What do I see? What do I observe? What can I get out of this? How can I relate to these people as opposed to what makes me different from these people? And just kind of just be open to it. It doesn't mean that we lose our ability for critical thinking or for analysis, and absolutely that comes in useful later on. But in the course of the addiction, what typically happens is that our defenses get hardened into these thought patterns that are very rigid and they're designed to keep the addiction protected. And so those belief systems that kept our addiction protected are the ones that kind of interfere with our ability to really settle into 12-step programs. So I think I would set those aside, set the biases aside, but we don't kind of lose what we know. After a while, I was able to kind of connect the dots, right? So that's how I use what I had read before, because like every other addict, I'd done a lot of reading myself, but saying, oh yeah, that's how this relates to that. And as opposed to saying, well, this could never mean anything because I'm over here. It's a matter of connecting the dots in a very gentle way. But I think you just being open to it is all it means, open to the experience.
Yeah, it's dropping that contempt prior to investigation, which we all do to a certain extent as we walk through the world. We have an experience that colors the way we think. We have to kind of drop our negativity bias. David, you talked about that a lot. Can you touch on negativity bias real quick and just how we drop that?
Yeah, so
I think that kind of plays into this.
Right. So negativity bias is a really interesting thing. And it really, if it goes back to kind of the physiology of our senses and our eyes and how much data there is coming at us from the universe. If we were aware of everything that our senses picked up, we would basically go psychotic because it would be an overload of information. And so what we do with vision is, and this is not a conscious process, but we basically train ourselves over time to see and notice certain things. And in the case of the addiction, our whole kind of very sophisticated, brilliant brain gets kind of engaged in this process, like to help our addiction. So we teach it to look for sexy people and potential opportunities for drug use and something where we might act out and an opportunity. And just we're starting to scan. And the other thing we do with negativity bias is we see all the things that are wrong and negative. So, this never works out. I always screw that up. Boy, in my day, it's only 9 o'clock and it's already run off the rails. We start to see only the negative stuff. And it's actually a brain, we've trained our brain. And it's the glass half full versus the glass, half empty thing. And so part of recovery is really bringing balance back into that. So we're not ignoring the negative stuff, and there's plenty of that to see in the world, but we're also realizing that's not the whole story. There's also good things that are happening to us. People give us breaks, people befriend us, people help us out. We help people. There's good things in the world. And that's why Scott and I always talk about gratitude lists, because for me, the mechanical tool to do this is gratitude. If I'm kind of caught up in negativity, if I can do a little mini gratitude list, it forces me to at least look at, okay, what are some things that might be going right today? And I can sort of name them, and it starts to give some balance between not noticing just the negative, but noticing the good stuff as well. And so I think really becoming aware, if you have that negativity bias, really look at it and become aware of it, and make an effort to counteract it, because you'll, believe me, the quality of your life will be a whole lot better if you do.
David, this next one was a question I was going to bring up earlier, but then when we were talking about beginner's mind, but then I saw it was here, so I decided to wait here. So do you have hints on how to start the 12 steps, leaving God out of it? I have very strong resentment toward the soldiers of God, which I assume means organized religion. I am a novice and know nothing about how spirituality can apply to me. I think that's a great question.
It's a great question. And yeah, I had a big problem with God when I first got into 12-step program, and couldn't see a way around it. I had a very rigid notion of what God is. And so basically I realized I needed these people. And so my kind of half step toward that was the group. I made the group my higher power. I basically said, well, these people collectively have more wisdom than I do. I counted up, seriously, I was bored one night, counted up the years of recovery in the room, in the circle. It was over 100 years of recovery. I thought, well, if somehow we can harness this collective wisdom, maybe I'll trust the group, I'll trust the process. And that was the beginning for me. And then over time, with a lot of ups and downs in my own journey, was to explore other kinds of spirituality, meaning not religion, but spirituality, meaning some looking for some meaning in the world, looking for my role in it, finding some purpose, finding a place to belong, seeing the beauty in things, and kind of seeing kind of a greater purpose. And for me, it led through Buddhism and some Hindu practices and this whole kind of eclectic stuff. It's still not, a white guy with a beard. I'm a long way from that. But I am, I would say I'm very spiritual, but not religious. And that was my own journey. But it can certainly be done. Please don't let that hang up or get in the way between you and 12-step program. Because remember the wording, if we look at it, it's the God of our understanding. Nobody's dictating to you what that means. It means whatever it means for you. And I think we need something, what I came to recognize is I need a power greater than me. That's the meaning, I think, from my mind behind that is I need something bigger than me. Certainly my addiction was bigger than me, and I needed something bigger to kind of combat that. And for me, it was the group, and then basically then it kind of expanded into other areas. But that was my journey for that.
Yeah, in the AA Big Book, there's actually a chapter written for non-believers. I think it's called For the Atheist, or To the Atheist, or
To the Agnostic.
To the Agnostics, thank you. And speaking of atheist and agnostic, when I came into the program, I was, if you ask me, I was either atheist or agnostic, depending on the day and my mood. I had no interest in the whole God thing, no interest in a higher power, no interest in developing a spiritual connection. And I got really hung up on step 3 because that's the first mention of God. And my sponsor finally said, okay, you know what, let's just put step 3 aside and let's go to step 4. Let's let you take your searching and fearless moral inventory, and we'll go all the way through this stuff. And then when we get to like step 11, where we have to start working on conscious contact, we'll revisit step 3 if we have to. And the interesting thing was, so I skipped step 3, worked the other steps. By the time I got to step 11, I did not have to work step 3. I had some sense of a higher power, and I've done a lot of work on it too. I did the whole searching thing like David did. I started out with the Force from Star Wars, it worked for me for a little while. Then I did an exercise where you draw a big circle on a piece of paper and write qualities that you would like your ideal higher power to have. inside the circle, and outside the circle, you write all those qualities you don't want, like judgmental and mean and punishing, and then you cut away the outside stuff and burn it, and you just keep the inside, and you act as if. And that's what really worked for me. I acted as if I had a higher power that was loving and caring and funny, and empathetic. And that worked for me over time. But I know other people. My friend Don, he's dead now. 53 years of sobriety. When he died, he was in his 90s. He was an atheist to the day he died. You don't have to believe in God to get it, to get sober and stay sober. So just kind of, my thought is just kind of push that language aside. And I would, the hair on my neck would stand up every time somebody said God in a meeting. That's how bad I was. And I finally just kind of had to get over it a little bit. And then I had to take a beginner's mind in and find something that worked for me, which has nothing to do with soldiers of God or organized religion. So yeah, find what works for you.
And by the way, there are groups, there are agnostic groups. There's refuge recovery or Dharma recovery, depending on the coast you're on, which is more a Zen Buddhist based recovery structure. So there's kind of alternate groups out there of like-minded people. So just, again, be open-minded and explore and see what resources are out there for you.
Yeah. Okay, next one here. I spent years educating myself about addiction in an attempt to control my drug and alcohol use. This is what we were talking about earlier. This failed miserably until I found the fellowship of AA. Question, is this the magic that Dr. Bob and Bill W., the founders of AA, discovered? And why, at a neurobiological level, does this work?
Great question. Well, yeah, to me, the magic is the connection, the social connection. And that famous TED Talk by Johan Hari, we've mentioned probably every week, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, the opposite of addiction is connection. So I think that fellowship that we talk about, and for me too, I came out of, I was an isolated drunk, basically. I could have drank by myself at home at the end, and it was a very dark, lonely place. And when I found meetings, I felt like I was coming home. I was coming back into the world with people, and I belonged, and I craved that social connection, and I found it in 12-step meetings, and I could never find it in my addiction ever. That was so meaningful. So that core connection of feeling like we are. There's a reciprocity to it too, right? So we accept other people, they accept us. For all our flaws, it was very liberating to know I could walk into a room and be accepted for who I was, and not have to be somebody that I wasn't, or try to be somebody that I wasn't. So that in itself for me was very healing. I think I got to think more about the neurobiological level, but I think what I would say to that basically is that there's a pretty good dopamine kick from that connectedness, from the social reciprocity, from belonging, from having a purpose, from all those kind of pro-social aspects that are really part of the 12-step experience, part of the recovery experience. And I think that's an amazing thing to do. Just like that beautiful cat. I mean, there's dopamine right there, right? We need each other. We need other creatures in our lives. And so that I think is the essence of that. And I think, the ability to connect and be part of something and be accepted for who I was, without any pretense.
Addiction operates with basically dopamine and adrenaline. When we start getting connection, less adrenaline, less dopamine, but certainly there's two cats up here. A lot less adrenaline, certainly less dopamine as well, but we get other neurochemicals like serotonin and oxytocin that are very pleasurable, and I personally think more meaningfully pleasurable, if that makes sense. So do you think that plays into it with the connection and
Right, because I think, with addiction, especially sex addiction or chemsex, it's all about intensity, right? And very often people kind of mistake intensity for intimacy, but it's all about intensity. And the kind of neurochemicals we're getting in recovery, I think, is more that the serotonin kinds of stuff. It's more connected. It's more, there's a stronger bonding kind of element to it. It's less intense, but I think ultimately far more satisfying to me. It's a similar kind of chemical profile, I think, as we get from comfort food and other kinds of behaviors like that. They can also be addictive, but yeah.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons I think we hear addicts say that sober sex ultimately is more rewarding than this super intense addiction sex. I mean, it was all about intensity before, but there was nothing beyond that intensity. Whereas sober sex, once we get there and we learn to, I mean, this is not just, we don't just flip a switch and sober sex is wonderful. We have to put some work in.
Right.
But there's a connection and there's just more to it. And it embeds in us in a better, longer lasting, more meaningful way. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I like it. It's really a different experience, and it's if we try to compare the intensity aspect of sex or other kinds of life experiences, it can't, right? It's a whole different thing. But I think ultimately people find the richer, kind of more connectedness and soothing kind of feeling of that, I think is much more rewarding ultimately than the ups and downs of the intensity and all the drama that goes with it.
As part of my work has discovered mother-son enmeshment, what are some immediate steps I can do to help address this and not feel the guilt? I'm assuming this is from the son, but it could also be a betrayed partner.
Right. So yeah, so mother-son enmeshment is when boundaries get kind of blurry, and very often the son may become like a little junior husband or a proto-husband for the wife, and maybe as more intimacy is revealed to him that should be appropriate, and just it's strange and confusing and somewhat damaging situation. And so really what I think the healing steps there are really establishing boundaries, reestablishing boundaries. And that may mean some distance. It may mean some setting rules. And you said not feel guilt. You probably will feel guilty in the beginning, at least, because that goes with trying to separate from a dysfunctional system. My own family my dad was an alcoholic, and very dysfunctional kind of family. And I had to fight, to my surprise, because I didn't like being there. I had to fight really hard to break out of that family system because I felt tremendous guilt about it, because we were all enmeshed, everybody's business, and there was no kind of healthy boundaries, healthy relationships. But I was surprised at the power that system had to break out of it. I felt so guilty about doing that. So I understand the guilt. And I think probably part of that is part of the healing process to break through. There's some great resources out there in terms of information and books. There are workshops on enmeshment that like weekend things or week-long programs. But I would really work on your own boundaries, on your what we call core beliefs, these I statements, what I am, and what are those? Maybe I am worthy or unworthy, I'm unlovable, I may need to work hard to get love. Whatever those core beliefs are, they're probably a little bit distorted from what they need to be. But I think just first of all, the steps I think are identifying the problem, that there's an issue here. And then sometimes we have to make kind of almost like a therapeutic separation to really kind of put some distance between you and your mother. And so you can start to get some healthy perspective on what that would look like. And it means then setting boundaries. And when we set a boundary, everybody's affected. And so we may get some pushback on that, which is going to make us feel more guilty. But I think part of it is just working your way out and becoming your own person. And ultimately, if you can reestablish that balance, I think everybody's going to be a lot happier about the relationship. But it's not an easy task. I don't want to say that it's like we can't flick a switch, like Scott just said, for sexuality. But it takes some time, and it certainly can be done. Certainly can be done.
Yeah, and I just popped a couple of some info in the chat feature. One of them was Dr. Ken Adams' book called Silently Seduced, which was a life changer for me. And he also has these weekend workshops on enmeshment. He and Jonathan Taylor, who I do a webinar with every other Thursday. I'll be on with him tomorrow at 11 a.m. if you want to ask mother enmeshment questions. He is the other person along with Dr. Ken Adams who facilitates those. And he's great. And he and I actually did a couple of dedicated webinars. So you can go to our YouTube channel, Sex and Relationship Healing, and pop in the terms mother enmeshment, and that they should pop up.
Beautiful.
They're definitely worth watching. I am an atheist, and it seems 12 steps and meetings have become my church. Is that a problem?
I guess, it comes down to terminology, right? I don't think it's a problem if you have found a group of like-minded people that are helping each other heal, right, for good purposes. I think that's not a bad thing. I guess that's the same definition of a church, probably, as well, right? A group of people, the like-minded, that have come together to help each other and profess their faith. But I think in 12-step meetings, to me, and I don't know if I would ever have called it my church, but I really had a profound sense of like, okay, I found a home, I found a place I belong, I found a place where people understand me, and I felt totally misunderstood in the world by everybody. And so those were all huge for me. And so I think if that's what you're talking about and finding, that's great. I think that's not a problem at all. The issue would be if you're using your atheism to kind of keep yourself separate somehow. It doesn't sound like you are. So I would, taking the concept we're talking about tonight, beginner's mind, I would just say, well, it is what it is. Enjoy the experience right now, see what it is, and see what you can learn from it without maybe trying to put a label on it. I think that's, sometimes we warn clients not to put labels on relationships, and if in an early relationship, because it can really skew things, maybe it's not a good idea to kind of call it a church or to put a label on it, but just to really embrace the experience for whatever it is for you.
And let's be honest, there are some similarities, and I don't want to turn people off here, but there are similarities between an AA meeting or an SAA meeting or whatever, and what happens in church. We come together as a fellowship for a common purpose. There's a ritual that we go through. Usually we read some stuff to start the meeting. We know what we're going to get every week. We often, hang out afterward and socialize. I think most people go to church not because they have this pull toward God, and I could be completely wrong, but because they have a pull toward other people, and a desire to connect in a way that feels comfortable for them. And I think 12-step meetings provide that. Like David said, I was never comfortable in my own skin and always felt like, I was an outcast and like people were whispering behind my back. And then I went into a 12-step meeting and people were talking about what I was thinking. They were saying it out loud, and I was like, oh my God, I'm not alone. Wow. So I connected, and we talked about it earlier. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. That's how we get sober, is we connect and reach out to others and support each other. And, so I attended Seeking Integrity's 2-week program in late June. Thank you. I came out confident that I will stay sober. However, I have had some slips and kept information from my wife longer than I should have. I've been working with the CSAP for 4 months and recently found a sponsor. Is it normal to have a few slips in the first few months after treatment, or at least when the first few months of starting to do the work of recovery?
Yeah, I think, we walk this fine line, right? But I think it's not unusual at all to have some slips. Ideally, and I distinguish between slips and relapse, where it's a kind of full-blown relapse. The slip is a smaller one. It's not insignificant, of course, but I think probably, I don't know what percentage of people, but there are certainly a significant percentage of people that do have little slips when they go out. We know statistically, whether it's a behavioral addiction or a drug addiction, if you can stay sober up to a year, then that changes dramatically. Your chances of ongoing sobriety really improve. But there are some slips. Remember, we're talking about very extreme cues and triggers, these high intensity landmarks that get pounded into our brain that light up when we see potential opportunity. And so it does happen. And so I think it's really important because shame is such a devastating aspect of this. We want to reduce the shame. And I think it's not a shameful thing, but we also kind of don't want to say go for it, right? And you give permission to slip. So I was trying to walk this fine line, but in reality, they do happen for a significant number of people, and a significant number of people can learn from them. And that's, I think, the best possible outcome is to take a slip and say, okay, what the heck just happened? What was I feeling? What was I doing? What didn't I do? Kind of do a little postmortem examination of it and see if you can learn from it. And then go forward and not make that mistake again. I think that's the best possible outcome, to look at a slip as a learning opportunity. Now, the other part here, though, is what do we do with that? And you mentioned not revealing it. Most of our circle plans and recovery plans have, if we have a slip or relapse, that within 24 hours, we notify our sponsor and ultimately our spouse about it, in order to kind of keep our integrity intact and maintain that goal of honesty. And so I think that's the bigger problem here, more than the slip, is not talking about it. And I understand the shame and the fear of consequences and all that, but believe me, it only gets worse. And I've had so many partners tell me it's not the slip, it's the lie about it. It's the not telling me. It's not the behavior that, it's not the using or looking at porn one night or whatever. It's the fact that he was still dishonest. So I think it's all about what we do with that. We're human, we do stuff, we make mistakes, hopefully we don't. But if we do have a slip, then it's on us to really come clean and come straight. So long story short, I'm glad you're working with the CSAT on this. I think that's very helpful. There's some repair work to do now to try to get that trust back on track. But it's always, and Scott, you've probably heard the same thing. It's the damage comes from not revealing it more than the act itself. And so anyway, but I'm glad you're with the CSAT and found a sponsor. It sounds like you get back on track. Please stay in touch with us. Let us know how you're doing.
Yeah. Slips are not uncommon, but they're not a requirement either. Neither are they a requirement.
Yeah.
And we hope that people don't slip, but when you do, get back on the horse, come clean, learn from it, do an autopsy of it, and find out when it started, because it usually started way before you actually slipped.
Right.
The thinking gets slippery. So, as a betrayed partner who acquired an STD from a sex and porn addict, is it foolish to stay in the marriage and risk getting another STD? What things should I look for to know I'm safe enough to become sexually intimate again with my spouse? This goes on for a while, but that's the question. And I'll just say, in his book, Out of the Doghouse, Dr. Rob says that betrayed spouses should not be having unprotected sex with an addict until they are confident that addict is sober and has produced several clean STD tests. Safe sex. If you want to be sexual, safe sex. David, thoughts?
Yeah, and that sums it up perfectly, and exactly what I was going to say, because the trust takes a long time, and we're talking in some years sometimes to get the intimacy and the relationship to where it needs to be. And so I think I totally agree with that, to not have unsafe sex until you are assured. And the assurance, to me, would have several benchmarks before it. A disclosure, for one, a period of time, a long period of time, without any kind of acting out or relapse. Good communication. I would use your gut instinct here, because a lot of times people know something's going on, they just can't quite put their finger on it. I think that direct communication, support for both of you, to have your team, whether it's a CSAT or some kind of therapist or support group, that's in place, so you can check your judgment and what's happening. But I think it takes time and instinct, and in the meantime, that old trust but verify thing. Yeah, you can trust, but protect yourself at the same time. I've seen couples that really start to embrace wonderful intimacy and trust after even a year. I mean, it does happen, but it just takes time. So be careful And, and to me, it comes down to communication too. The ability to do daily check-ins, I think, is incredibly valuable tool. Just even 10 minutes of talking to each other, really eye contact, and to sort of start to build that relationship again is going to be really important. But I can't give you a clock, a date, a time, but I think it does take time. But in the meantime, you have to take precautions to protect yourself and get the support you need.
What if the sex addict of 50 plus years has patterns of relapse, not working through relational issues, gets very little support? Every 2 weeks, he goes to a men's group, few calls to the members of the group. He hasn't made any obvious life changes, no accountability, currently lives alone, but feels ready to date new people after 7 months. Can't communicate. I assume this is from the betrayed partner. Says he can't communicate with me at all because it isn't good for his own recovery. So could he really have the skills to get healthy connection, or is he looking to get a high? Seems to me he is stuck. If you're not communicating with him, why do you care? But I'm sorry, that was harsh. David, please fix it for me.
I think we have to look and see evidence of recovery, right? And to me, especially in early recovery, especially with a long history like that of decades worth of these addictive patterns, we need to be actively involved in a recovery. And that means daily meetings, daily activities, sponsor calls. It means all those activities that we need to see. It means attitude changes, not blaming people, not being irritable, not refusing to talk. I mean, all those, I think some humility, some open communication, all that is just really, really important. So these are all, to me, just a lot of red flag warning signs that this person isn't really engaged in recovery to the degree, I think, at least necessary. So stuck maybe, I think. But I think everybody in recovery needs that accountability partner. They need the connection, as we were talking about tonight, of meetings and groups. They probably need a therapist. They need to be doing it and showing it. And I don't hear or read much evidence of that here. And addicts do get stuck in these holding patterns. Just kind of, they'll go as far as they think they have to and no further. And unfortunately, that doesn't really represent recovery very well to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't mean to be rude earlier, and I'm glad you're on here because you're getting support for yourself. And I encourage you to seek out the betrayed partners groups and ask this question there, because I think you'll get a response from them that focuses on you instead of the addict. And I understand why you care, but I also kind of wonder, you might need to let this one go if you're not even communicating. I don't know. I don't want to tell you what to do. I'm sorry. I'm talking way too much on this question. I don't think I'm being helpful.
No, I think it's just, you have to really evaluate and with a realistic eye. And by the way, and I still, after many years of recovery, in certain situations, I don't necessarily trust my own self. I'll get some input on it. I'll do a consultation, and if it's a clinical case, I'll consult with another therapist. If it's a personal life issue, I'll consult with people that I trust and say, hey, this is the situation. What do you think? And I would encourage you to get some feedback on this and get some support to see.
Thank you for bailing me out.
Yeah, no, seriously. And just, because, and maybe because I'm getting older, I think time is really important to me. I wouldn't want to spend, another 10 years in a bad relationship at this point in my life, frankly. But get some support, get some input for sure.
Yeah, this question asks, slip versus relapse. Our definition is a slip is a brief return to active addiction that you come clean about right away. A relapse is a return to active addiction that you keep secret. Slip, you come clean about it, you tell your sponsor, you tell your partner, you tell your therapist, and you get back on the horse. A relapse is you pretend that everything's okay and keep doing it.
Right.
So, can you explain the difference between vivid dreams that the addict has and lucid dreaming? Is the latter good or bad?
Interesting question. So addicts can have very vivid dreams, often fueled by the fantasies and sometimes by drugs, and it can get pretty intense and very triggering. Lucid dreaming is actually a whole different thing that where you are sort of semi-awake. It's that state when you either fall asleep or wake up, you kind of half in, half out. And lucid dreaming, the definition of it is that you can kind of have an active part and kind of control the dream while you're in the dream. It's a very different state that is used in sort of deep meditation sometimes and with certain aspects, but I think it's very different than the vivid dreaming. That's very triggering for people. Although lucid dreaming is quite difficult to accomplish, and I don't think it's necessarily a good spot for the addict to be in. Anyway, I think being out in the open in the present and then the daylight is probably the best place for an addict. As somebody once said, the space between our ears is a bad neighborhood, and I think if we get caught up in there, there can be a problem. So.
And it's fairly normal for recovering addicts, particularly in the first year or two of sobriety, to have acting out dreams, drinking dreams, using dreams that are really vivid, and you wake up thinking you really lost your sobriety, and then you
exactly
didn't. I mean,
and those are totally
fighting back. Or?
Yeah, those are totally normal. They don't mean anything in my experience. I think it's just our brain kind of has these bursts, these firing to kind of trying to rein control back. It doesn't mean it happens. I would not be upset by it. I talk about it, journal if you want, but I wouldn't be upset by it. They don't mean much.
Let's take one more. Is the 90-day celibacy that's recommended, does that mean that I can still have sex with my wife or not? She has demanded sex a few times and I have discounted, recorded on my. So this person is having a 90-day abstinence basically and wants to know if he can have sex with his wife as part of that.
To me, if I establish a 90-day celibacy contract with a client, that's from everybody and everything.
Including masturbation and spouse.
And spouses, yeah. So this is unusual.
Of this celibacy period?
Well, and it's really to kind of break the sequencing that we get into these patterns of sexual arousal and sexual patterns all caught up in our addictive process. It's really to separate that out. We spoke earlier of the intensity that goes with sex addiction, and to really kind of start to transition from that need for intensity more toward real intimacy, which is a whole different kind of mindset, different neurochemicals. So I think it's just really, it's a marker that kind of is a dividing line between the old way of using sex to control our moods versus a new way of approaching sex as a way to express intimacy and affection for somebody we care about. So I think it's a whole different thing. By the way, 90 days, there's no literature on this. Some people say 30 days, some people say 90 days, some people say not at all. It's really, in my experience, a highly individualized thing.
So we have run out of time with a whole batch of questions left. I apologize.
Scott, can I say one thing just for education wise? It's a follow up on a previous question. Somebody said, but there's not a test for HPV in men. Human papillomavirus. Yes, there is. Gay men all the time are getting pap smears. It's an anal pap smear, but it can happen and it can detect it and detect the dangerous kinds as well. So check with your doctor.
Yeah, please. Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We will be back next week. If you didn't get your questions answered, please come back next week and bring them. If you have mother enmeshment questions, tomorrow at 11 Pacific with Jonathan Taylor. Anything else, David, that I forgot?
I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Great.
Well, thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. Be well, and we'll see you in a week.
Thanks, Scott. Take care. Bye-bye.